In the wisdom of Kabbalah, when we talk about the situations of the creature, we need some measurements, numbers, discernments to measure these situations, write them down, and truthfully convey them to another, as in any science, so that another will be able to take these discernments and describe the exact situation that we want to convey. So there are a few signs about states of the creature. Without knowing how to register them and how to understand them, it's impossible to talk about the continuation of the evolution of the creature. We've said that every single situation consists of a creature, which is called a kli, or a desire, and the fulfillment, which is light, that can be called creator, which is received within the desire as pleasure. So every situation in reality consists of these two discernments, a desire and pleasure. Perhaps there are many desires. As we said, 4 bchinot, 4 discernments that stem from the shorish, and each has its own fulfillment. And we said that these bchinot, these phases, are actually circles. Why are they circles? What is it about the shape of the circle? It means that there is no discernment of up or down, big or small, within the circle. One igul is the first bchina, the second igul is the second bchina, or another bchina. But when I, for example, draw bchina aleph here, bchina bet there, corresponding to the first and second circles, I'm not trying to emphasize that one is higher than the other, but that one precedes the other. Precedes the other. Comes before. First state 1 comes, or first kli, or bchina aleph, first bchina, and then the second bchina. But in between them there is no higher or lower state. So I'm drawing them as circles, because in circles, what is up in one igul, for example, one circle, in that same circle, it'll be lower down on the other side. So there's a sort of equivalence between all the points in the circle compared to the center. If I'm speaking of circles with a common center, so through circles I can express the ratio, the relation between the bchinot as merely cause and consequence, reason and its effect, cause and its effect, and not higher and lower. If I want to stress who is higher and who is lower, then I'll have to draw them as one below the other, or this way, one after the other. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Etc. If every situation consists of two pieces of information How do we register them? The fulfillment in the Kli, in the desire, depends on the desire. Yesterday, we said that if the desire in Pchinat Shorosh is born as a desire to enjoy, it feels the light as pleasure. It might be small, it might not be its own desire, it might not be a desire that precedes the light, but it's born by the light, but nevertheless, the light is felt as some sort of pleasure, a pleasure of reception. So we've said that this light is called Or Chochmah, light of wisdom, and the desire is called a will to receive. And that's B'china Aleph. That's the first B'china, or the first phase. And that's why we can talk about two data, two pieces of information about the light, that's B'china Aleph, and the Kli, the vessel in B'china Aleph. So this kind of registration is called Reshimo, which is a reminiscence or a recollection. It comes from the word impression, giving us some sort of information about what happens here in the state of the creature. Therefore, we can talk about B'chinat Shorosh, and then B'china Aleph, and Bet, second B'china, and then Gimel, third B'china, and Dalet, the fourth B'china. In B'china Bet, phase 2, it's a different desire to bestow, to give, but we can register its situation as Bet, 2 by 2. In Gimel, in phase 3, in B'china Gimel we write Gimel 3 by 3. In Dalet, in the fourth, we write Dalet 4 by 4. The upper number indicates the light, and the lower the Kli in that state. This is how we can register anything, because actually there's nothing more than the overall Kli and the light that fills it only according to the desire. Why only according to the desire? Because there's a law. Yes, to begin with, we see that there is no coercion in spirituality. That if the Creator wants to do good to the creature, He has to create in the creature a big desire and a specific one for that delight that He wants to give. So the Creator's concern is for the desire in the creature, because to begin with, the benefit is already there. But the greater the desire of the creature, the more it will feel the pleasure itself and the giver of the pleasure. The states that the creature went through are states where from B'chinat Shorosh it comes to B'china Aleph, from B'china Aleph to B'china Bet, and then to B'china Gimel, phase 3, and finally B'china Dalet, phase 4. We have said that every single situation contains the previous states. So you might say that from B'chinat Shorosh, the root phase, came B'china Aleph, phase 1, afterwards B'china Bet, phase 2, afterwards B'china Gimel, phase 3, and then B'china Dalet, phase 4. And all these B'chinot, these phases, exist, and they all stem or feel the previous B'chinot, because when B'china Aleph receives from B'chinat Shoresh, it feels B'chinat Shoresh that wants to give it. B'china Bet feels B'china Aleph, and before it there's B'chinat Shoresh. The same applies for B'china Gimel. It feels the thought of creation, and it's in B'chinat Shoresh, and from there to B'china Aleph, to B'china Bet, and to B'china Gimel. The same applies for B'china Dalet. It also feels all the preceding B'chinot. When it feels all the preceding B'chinot, it feels that it contains them. Because in order to reach its own desire, it feels all the preceding desires and how they work with your polite with the thought of creation. So you might say this: in B'china Dalet itself, there is within it there are 5 parts. The B'chinat Shoresh in it, and then Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and Dalet. When we talk about desires and how they evolve, then we talk about what happens in B'chinat Dalet in each B'china. If I say that B'chinat Dalet at its end feels that it wants to receive, that it is me receiving actually from the state in B'china Gimel. B'china Gimel receives in order to bestow upon the Creator from the will to receive that it's got in B'china Aleph and the will to bestow in B'china Bet. From that B'china Dalet, actually B'china Gimel wants to enjoy the situation that was created in B'china Gimel. So how does it enjoy? B'china Dalet repeats all those states that exist in B'china Gimel and adds a new desire to them, which is B'china Dalet. So now it is B'china Dalet in Dalet. That's the new desire. And what exists in it from before is its own integration with the previous B'chinot. What happens with B'china Dalet next? After it feels that it receives pleasure from the Creator and enjoys receiving pleasure, and it is from the Creator. Yes, so these two bits, these two pieces. You might draw it this way: B'china Dalet feels pleasure from the Creator in order to bestow. That's what it actually executes. And from the both of them, it wants to enjoy. Once after it feels it, it then begins to feel vis-a-vis that desire in which she enjoys. The will to receive is writing that it is opposite from the giver. Through every discernment in her, she attains the attribute of the giver, the attribute of Shoresh, the root property, and feels how opposite it is from her. It's like what happened in B'china Bet, or at the end of B'china Aleph. when she received the light, the pleasure, and felt within it that her state is opposite from the roots. Because the roots is higher, more sublime, she felt it is in an inferior state, and then wanted to prefer. Instead of being in B'china Aleph, to be like B'chinat Shorosh. And then the desire to bestow was made in her, which is called B'china Bet. But here, the reaction was not on her own desire, because in B'china Aleph, the desire comes from above. First came the desire and then the fulfillment. That's what B'china Aleph is called, how it is made. Because neither the desire nor the fulfillment is theirs, is her. B'china Aleph swaps between them easily. She just feels that she would prefer to be like B'chinat Shorosh. But here in B'chinat Dalet, she feels that the desire is her own. It was born from her, from below. It's the first time in all the B'chinot, Shorosh, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, that in B'chinat Dalet the desire is made in her. She chose, by matching herself, by resembling herself to the Creator in B'chinat Gimel, she chose to receive the state of the Creator as pleasure, to relate to it as pleasure. And because she feels this way, that it's her own desire, and it is opposite from the Creator, so it's not that she wants to replace it, as in B'china Bet, but she feels her state is inferior to the Creator. That sensation of the ratio between her and the Creator is called Shem. It's the oppositeness between her and the Creator, because the desire in B'china Dalet is hers, and vis-a-vis that desire, she feels how opposite she is from him to him. So she doesn't just prefer one desire to another, but here there's a special act where she naturally, that naturally occurs, where she doesn't want to be in this new desire that was born in her for the first time. Is the desire, is the will of the creature, the will to receive, is writing the desire of the creature to receive, but instead she wants to move herself away from her, but she can't, because it was born in her. If in B'china Bet she wants to resemble the Creator completely, and she easily resembles herself to the Creator because she feels His desire and attaches herself to it, acquires it on top of the will to receive in Aleph. Here she can't do that, because her desire here in B'china Dalet was born in her, from her, out of previous operations. So what she can do is disagree with it. She doesn't want to feel She doesn't want to be in her own desire. So that attitude to herself, to her own desire, is called tzimtzum, restriction. Because it happens for the first time here, it is called tzimtzum aleph, the first restriction. Aleph means one in numeric value. So tzimtzum aleph is the first restriction. Rav is saying this is not a simple situation to explain, because the desire that comes from within the creature is a natural desire, one that was born and absorbed within. It is felt as its own nature, and you can't get rid of it. You can only not want to want what nature compels you to want. But you can't replace it for something else. Meaning, after B'chinat Dalet, if we talk about a desire, we cannot say that some desire came instead of B'chinat Dalet. We can say that on top of the desire in B'chinat Dalet, now a new attitude to that desire in B'chinat Dalet is born, but it's a different attitude. We always have the will to receive that the creature feels, yes, that it wants to enjoy the pleasure that comes from the Creator and the presence of the Creator himself that the creature feels. So it wants to enjoy that state, that this is its nature, that it is first and foremost its own nature. And after that, there's a certain attitude to its own nature, agreeing, disagreeing with it, wanting to use it in a certain way, but it's a fixed, it's a given thing, what appeared in B'china Gimel, the giving and the giver. The result of the creature not wanting to use its own desire, because there's no coercion in spirituality, as you said, that to begin with, as the Creator wants to delight the creature, it can never suppress the creature, but only indirectly induce the evolution of the desire, the growth of the desire. So, when there's a desire in the creature to not use its own desire, there's a departure here, ejection. The light exits these four b'chinot, and all these four b'chinot then remain empty. If we, in a situation where previously we had fulfillment in all four b'chinot, it was then called Olam Ein Sof, the world of infinity, of no end, because there was endless fulfillment. So the same four b'chinot, without the fulfillment, we refer to them as Olam HaTzimtzum, the world of the restricted world. So now we have on our chain of cause and consequence, we have the thought of creation, to do good to his creations, B'chinat Shoresh, from which stem B'chinot Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and Daled. B'chinat Daled, well, the full B'chinat Daled is called Olam Ein Sof, the world of Ein Sof, no end, and afterwards B'chinat Daled restricts itself, it induces Tzimtzum Aleph on itself, and as a result its state is called the restricted Bchina Daled, or Olam HaTzimtzum, the restricted world, or the world of restriction. As we have said about states that we have where Bchina Daled in the world Ein Sof, we register its situation as Daled over Daled, Daled by Daled. The upper Daled is the state of the light in it, or you might call it Reshimo de Hitlapshut, which is a Reshimo, a recollection of the clothing of the light, and the lower Daled is the Kli, which is called Reshimo, the reminiscence of the Avyut. Avyut is the will to receive, because the Kli is measured in its Avyut, in its will to receive, and accordingly the light is measured according to its power. Its power depends on the Avyut of the Kli, on the will to receive. So in the world of Tzimtzum, Olam Tzimtzum, we have a state of Dalet over Dalet, over the and the light and the Kli, which are only Reshimot, reminiscences of the light and the Kli that are in the state of the world of Tzimtzum. We say that there is no light, only the Reshimot, the memory of the light that was there before. That's all that's left. About the Kli, we say that there's a desire to not use its own desire. That's its Kli. That's the reaction. And this reaction to the state where Bchina Dalet was infinitely filled is, as we've said, a special reaction. Unlike the transition between Bchina Aleph and Bchina Bet, because in Bchina Dalet the desire is our own. That's why the reaction was tzimtzum, restriction, to restrict its own desire, whereas in Bchina Bet, Bchina Aleph easily swapped the desire. After Bchina Dalet restricted itself and no longer wanted to use her own desire, it wanted to resemble Bchinat Shoresh, just like in Bchina Bet. As Bchina Bet wanted to be like Bchinat Shoresh, so Bchina Dalet actually wants the same. But if Bchina Aleph was replaced with Bchina Bet and became his actual bestowal, in Bchina Dalet, because it's her own desire, it can't just leave her. It can't be swapped into a will to bestow, but Bchina Aleph only wants to be like the giver. By nature, she can't leave. So that impression in her from Bchinat Shoresh is registered in her as an intention to be, an aim to be like the giver. Meaning, if Bchina Aleph felt her desire to enjoy, and then felt the giver, and after feeling the giver, she wanted to invert her will for bestowal, Bchina Dalet with her will to enjoy both the pleasure and the giver of the pleasure, through it she begins to feel that, first of all, She does not want to use her own desire. And then she has the tzimtzum. And afterwards, the evolution after the tzimtzum is that she still wants to be the giver. The giver. So how does she become a giver? She has an example for that. Just like how did Bchina Bet become a giver? She switched to Bchina Gimel. Bchina Gimel receives, and by so doing, she becomes like or similar to the creator, to the giver. Why? Because she uses the love of the giver for her. So she knows that if she receives, the giver will feel pleasure. So she works with her desire, with her natural desire, in Bchina Aleph and in Bchina Bet, and both these desires are in fact come from above. Now in Bchina Dalet she's got her own desire from below. So, as in the reaction of making Tzimtzum Aleph, the first restriction, because it's her own desire, here the reaction for being the giver is special, because she can't get rid of her own desire and create a new will, like in Bchina Gimel. But the previous desire remains in her, the desire to enjoy. But here, only the intention is added. The intention to be a giver, to resemble Bchinat Shoresh. She cannot change the actual will. That can only be changed in Bchinot Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, phases 1, 2, 3. Bchinat Dalet can no longer do it. So the only thing that's added to it is the intention, how to be a giver. That's what it wants to know now. So what can she do? Add the intention, the aim over the desire. So she uses it as Bchina Gimel did, which was born out of Bchina Bet. How? If the Creator loves me, because in the end everything comes from Him, from Bchinat Shoresh. So I can, Bchina Dalet says, use His love with my desire. If light comes to me from Him, and I do not receive it because of my desire, which is in me, burning in me to receive that pleasure, that will be the part that will receive the pleasure and joy. I'll stop it. I'll perform the Tzimtzum Aleph, the first restriction, and then I'll work with my desire to receive that pleasure only because He wants to give to me. He enjoys this action. And then I end up receiving, but actually being the giver. Baal Sulam gives an example which is very general for the whole of creation about the host and the guest. He says this: if the host wants to give pleasure to the guest, and the guest rejects the pleasure, gives it back to the host and doesn't want to receive it, by that it only, or he only hurts the host, because he, the Creator, created the desire in the creature, actually created the creature in order to give it pleasure, fulfillment. And the creature repels that pleasure. So because the host wants to do good, the host seemingly has a need where if the creature does not receive this benefit, the host suffers. In the love of the host, in the will to bestow of the host, that's what the guest, the creature, uses. He stops his pleasure. He cannot stop the pleasure that comes from the host, but the pleasure depends on the desire, on the will. If I see my own desire and then restrict it, meaning perform some actions whereby, although I want to enjoy, I do not want to enjoy de facto from the pleasure that comes from the host, because I see the greatness of the host, the form of bestowal of the host, like B'china Bet compared to B'china Aleph when the host appears. So, in this manner, even though by nature I do want to enjoy, I will not want to use my nature. And after that, it'll want to give to the host. How? By receiving. But its reception will be with a desire, and over it an intention. So, in the beginning, he's got his own natural desire. Then it restricts it. Afterwards, it comes to a state where he can use his desire or to receive in order to bestow, and does it. So he receives with that desire, with the intention to bestow. So he uses the desire that the creator, the host had created in the previous B'chinot, and that he had acquired in B'chinat Dalet. He uses the awareness of the host as the giver and all the pleasures that come from the host. He uses every element in creation as he and what he perceives of the upper one. There is no addition here to the actions of the Creator, but only one thing: the attitude of the creature toward creation. When the creature relates to creation only in order to be like the Creator. Such a form of reception with the aim to bestow upon the Creator is called receiving in order to bestow. This is what the evolution of B'china Dalet comes to in the actions that appear right after it fulfills itself endlessly, restricts itself, remains empty, and then the ability to work with its nature, with the desire that it has, with its awareness of the host and the pleasures, and be exactly like the Creator, now it appears. So then it goes to carry out this intention in actual fact. As usual, as we've said, that in every situation we have the roshem, the impression, the memory of that state. So, for everything she sees now, every purpose she sees now in her actions, she also feels that decision as in information. Dalet and Dalet. The first Dalet is her intention to work with, to reject the light that comes to her. It's called Dalet Dit Labshut. Labshut is clothing. And Dalet Di Ovyut is the will to receive, is a sensation that with all its desire, it wants to work in the form of bestowal. So it begins. Bchina Daled decides that when the light comes, she will reject it. By so doing, she will express her will to not receive it as before, prior to the Tzimtzum, to not use her own will to receive. And then she receives it with the intention to bestow. Now here there's a problem, because she has to test herself and measure herself how much of an aim to be like the Creator she has, like the Giver. So she feels that in fact this intention to be like the Creator, like the Giver, can be in her, or in the Bchinot in her, in Shoresh, in Aleph, in Bet, and in Gimel. But in Bchinat Dalet itself, she doesn't feel she can receive in order to bestow there, because Bchinat Dalet is her own desire. Well, still, the previous Bchinot are now desires that are in her. So Bchinat Dalet takes them into consideration. So we register it this way. Bchinat Dalet, with all the previous Bchinot, let's try it as a line now. Not as a circle, because now she understands that the greater her will, the more she can bestow. So she divides herself by desires for Shoresh Aleph Bet Gimel Dalet. Each desire with which she can bestow is considered to be higher, closer to the Creator, and vice versa. Any desire in which she can give less to the Creator or not at all, meaning reach equivalence of form, will be farther. Meaning the Creator is up here with the measure of bestowal, and the creature, its desire, is down here with the attribute of reception. So, to the extent that the creature can resemble the Creator, to that extent it is here on the ladder of degrees between the nature of the creature and the nature of the Creator. This is how she measures herself with her intention. If her intention is to bestow, to be like the Creator, she considers herself either closer to Him, meaning higher, because that's how she weighs, she regards the bestowal as higher, or as farther from Him, lower, worse. So what is the act that Bchinat Dalet actually performs? Because now her problem is the measurement of the intention, making the tzimtzum, weighing how much she can give and how much she can't. So prior to the act, we have a state, a situation which is called rosh, head. Calculation. How much light comes to me. That's what Pchina Dalet says. I have to know that first. And then I reject it. I still don't receive it. That too is an act that happens in the rosh, in the head, or the mind. The light that comes is called direct light because it's the pleasure which comes directly, which directly built the desire in the thought of creation, which built it in Pchina Aleph and fulfilled it. Now the light that Pchina Dalet feels is direct light, and as she rejects it, she repels it from herself, it is called returning light, or reflected light. Below this boundary, where we calculate everything, which is called the mind, or the rosh, there's a desire. The rosh is the intention. He's writing rosh equals intention. A calculation. Once she rejects everything, she says, what? I have to measure myself, see how much I can receive, with this reception being considered bestowal. So she measures herself. How? According to the Reshimot that remained in her. Reshimot being recollections. So she checks according to the Reshimot of Dalet of Hitlapshut, clothing, and Dalet of Ofiyut, the will to receive, meaning the impression of the situation that she had in a state called the world Ein Sof, and the desire she had there in the world Ein Sof to enjoy that pleasure. She checks it and feels that she can receive in order to bestow, except in Pchina Dalet in Dalet, in the previous three Pchinot. That's what it's called. So she receives. In some of her desires, she receives. Which part? And desires Shosh, Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. The desire of Pchina Dalet remains empty. The place where she receives pleasures is called the Toch, the interior. The place where, in her desire, where she cannot receive pleasures is called, because she decided to receive only out of equivalence of form, is called Sof, end. The Sof, the end of Pchina Dalet, the complete Sof, the conclusion, is called Siyum. The Toch and Sof together, the interior and the end together, all the desires, they are called Guf, body. And the part that is added in her, which did not exist before, but was added along with the intention to receive in order to bestow, is called the rosh, the mind. The place where these discernments begin in Pchina Dalet, within the Guf, the place where the desire begins is called Peh, mouth. The place where the reception ends is called Tabu, navel. We use these names even now, in a state where we don't know where they came from, actually. Later on, we will learn about the worlds, the situations, where B'chinat Dalet, in order to fulfill itself completely, in order to bestow, in order to be completely like the Creator, she goes through various situations, and from the situations that she undergoes, there will be such where they will become as roots for our own body. And so from there, Kabbalists take these names. The Pe, Tabu, Siyum, the end, actually it's called Siyum Bagi, the end of the feet. There's also Chazeh, the chest, and all kinds of parts which are named after parts of our corporeal body. Why is it so? Because in the wisdom of Kabbalah, when we begin to discover the upper world, we feel forces. We research the desire, and within the desire, the kinds of fulfillments that exist. But we don't know what to name these parts, these evolutions, these impressions, these actions, the interconnections between states. We don't know how to name them because it's a sensation, a bare sensation, without any exterior sign or appearance, but it's a desire and a kind of fulfillment that we don't have a name for. So we take the names according to what these states project on our world, because what exists in our world exists in the upper world too, all of it. So when I reach this sensation in the research of the upper world, and I want to name a certain act, a certain state by some name, I want to discern it, to observe it, to measure it. So I take that state, the spiritual state, and measure it's the corporal state that comes as a projection. In the corporal states we always have names for actions, for situations. So I take that name of that state and name the spiritual state after it, the spiritual act, in the same corporal name, using the same corporal name. So now I have found a way to name and to perceive exactly which state or act or phenomenon or connection in spirituality. Because Kabbalists attain the spiritual world through this world, for them both these worlds sort of clothe one another. So you can compare it to one drawing, transparent, of this world, and on top of it there is another spiritual drawing of the upper world. So they clothe one another. Only the objects are apparent and are felt as different. But when they appear before the eyes of the Kabbalists, they come close in one another. So through the transparent drawing with the names and the numbers and what they see in this world, they see these exact phenomena in the spiritual world. Or you might, well, it's actually the opposite. The phenomena in this world, in the see-through drawing, through it they see the roots that will determine what will happen in this world. So we have a readily available language to name anything or any term in the spiritual world by names of this world. And this is why this language is called the language of the branches. which is in fact a language from our own lexicon. I'm sure there are many other names that Kabbalists add, technical names, such as names of Sfirot of Olamot, worlds, certain actions in spirituality were in mundane sciences. We also add these names. Every science, every lore has its own language in addition to the usual, ordinary language. It's the same in Kabbalah. The wisdom of Kabbalah uses the language of the branches, as any science uses its own language. Malchut Ein Sof, after the Tzimtzum, decided to perform this special act of receiving as much as it can in order to bestow. So now what it does, it builds itself in a certain way, and this kind of structure is called Parzuf, which consists, as you said, of Rosh and Guf, body and mind. The Guf is divided into Toch and Sof, interior and end. The Guf is from the Pei to the Tabu, and the Sof is the Tabu through Siyum. We said that when the light comes to the Parzuf and encounters the Pei, it's called direct light, and when it rejects it, it's called Or Chozer, returning light. Then it calculates how much it can receive in order to bestow, how much in bestowal can it be. So that light will also be called Or Chozer, returning light, as opposed to Or Yashar, direct light. Later on we'll learn that there are many kinds of Or Yashar, direct light, and Or Chozer, returning light. We don't have to really get into this right now. There are different kinds. Afterwards, after the calculation, the Parzuf receives the Or Yashar, the direct light that comes, meaning the pleasure. When it is now clothed in Or Chozer, in the returning light, in the aim to bestow. So these two lights together are called Or Pnimi, inner light, which expands within the Parzuf, in the Toch, in the interior of the Parzuf. And the part of the Parzuf that is the B'china Dalet in the Parzuf, which is unable to receive the light, is called the Sof, the end of the Parzuf, and remains empty. The calculations that were made are calculations of Dalet Yitlapshut and Dalet Dovyut, Dalet of clothing and Dalet of Yut, of receiving, that remained from Malchut Ein Sof, Malchut of Ein Sof. Let's say that the Parzuf calculated and could receive in order to bestow only 20% of the Or Yashar that came to it. Meaning, after it received all the light came up to the Tabu and filled up the place that was decided it would fill up. So what's left on the outside is another 80% of the Or Yashar, the direct light that came. And that will be called Or Makif, surrounding light. It's called surrounding Makif because it can't get into the Parzuf. It is rejected by the Parzuf, meaning the Parzuf discerned it and rejected it, meaning it's not that the light just comes to the Parzuf and remains this way, but in that rejected light, which is now called surrounding light, there is the attitude of the creature, of the desire, where the creature rejects it. It understands, in the sense that these 80% correspond to the B'china Dalet, which it can't fulfill. So within that O Makif, the surrounding light. There's all the work and the rejection and everything that the creature relates to it. He understands these great pleasures, discerned them, felt them, and decided that he couldn't. They were too big to receive in order to bestow. There's another small addition. This Bchinat Dalet did not remain empty by rejecting these, for example, 80% of all Makif surrounding light. It rejects because it wants to be like the Creator, and this, in fact, is her act of bestowal. She's unable to receive in order to resemble Him. She's unable to work in reception, to be opposite from the Creator. So her rejection is in fact a form of bestowal, the desire to be in bestowal. Her maximum ability to be in bestowal, to reject. And that's why she can't just stay empty like Malchut Ein Sof, which just got rid of the fulfillment. Here, Bchinat Dalet feels, because she wants to resemble the Creator, and that's why she remains empty, so that too gives her a certain fulfillment. It's called O Chasadim, light of mercy. It's somewhat similar to Bchinat Bet, which rejects the light that filled her in Bchinat Aleph and remains with the pleasure of being somewhat like the Creator. In what? In her desire to be like the Creator. She doesn't give yet, but she wants to be like it. The pleasure, the satisfaction from wanting to be like the Creator, similar to Him, is called O Chasadim. This is why here the O Pnimi from Pe to Tabu is O Chokhmah. That's what expands. And below the Tabu, there expands the O Chasadim. Out of the rejection, out of the desire to be attached to the act of bestowal. So when I wrote empty here, it means devoid of chokhmah, wisdom, light of wisdom. We have several other things that we need to add here. First of all, when the Parzuf or the creature does something, some operation, this act is in its Bchinat Dalet, not in its Gimel or Bet or Aleph, the previous Bchinot. Because you can't do something unless from within a desire for it. So what does it mean that we work from Pe to Tabu only with the three Bchinot and not in Bchinat Dalet? It means that from Pe to Tabu we work with Bchinat Dalet to the extent that it can work with Bchinot Shoresh Aleph Bet Gimel. And below Tabu, Bchinat Dalet, to the extent that it works with Bchinot Shoresh Aleph Bet Gimel and Dalet, meaning we always work with Bchinat Dalet. But the question is this Bchinat Dalet integrated in Bchinot Aleph Bet Gimel as Bchinat Dalet? Is it integrated in the bestowal? He's writing the Bchinot, the phases of bestowal of the Creator, and seemingly restricts itself and doesn't work with its own big desire, but works only in supporting the previous Prinot, which is called, well, that's the meaning of integration of Prinat Dalet in the previous 3 Prinot. In this manner, we have the toch, the interior of the Parzuf. Now, if Prinat Dalet operates with 3 previous Prinot and its own Prinat, it can no longer receive, and that's called the sof, the end of the Parzuf. So both in the Rosh, in the Rosh too, we have 10 Sfirot, in the toch also, and in the sof. We always calculate on the desire, which is the 10th Sfirah, the last Prinah, which is the only one that feels that the desire is its own, and the decision is its own, the independence is its own. That's the creature. So, what is a Parzuf in fact? It is Malchut Ein Sof that operates with all the desires in her, weighing how much she can work with them in order to bestow. And this part is called Rosh, the mind, and then how much she can receive in order to bestow with her desires. That's called Toch, the interior, and how much of her desires remain unable to actually act in order to bestow, but are added to it or join it by not working, by staying inactive. It's a passive participation, so to speak, and that's called the Sof, the end. So, the overall structure of 30 Sfirot, Rosh Toch Sof, is called Parzuf. There cannot be any other structure unless what exists in the Rosh is a decision to receive 100% in order to bestow, and then everything will be received in the Toch, and the Sof will be cancelled. If such a state will ever be possible, is ever possible, it'll be called Gmar Tikkun, the end of correction, where the corruption that was made by cancelling Tzimtzum Aleph and Malchut Ein Sof will be filled up just like prior to Tzimtzum Aleph, receiving in order to bestow. Then the Parzuf, in addition to Malchut of Tzimtzum Aleph, will have Rosh, and within that Malchut of Tzimtzum Aleph, it will receive everything in order to bestow in her Toch, and all of it will be as Toch. So now we will see how this Prinat Dalet, with her intention to bestow, works by way of cause and consequence after the Tzimtzum. We said that after Tzimtzum Aleph, she decides that if light comes to her, she will reject it, and then check how much she can receive in order to bestow, and receive that part. The part that she cannot receive, she doesn't. It remains empty. She rejects in it. In it she rejects the light. So this act of rejecting the light takes place through something called masach, screen. Now what is a masach? We've said that the guf of the Parzuf is your desire. a desire is expressed in us in an act of pooling. It draws the pleasure to itself. The light, the pleasure, it draws it. So the masach, the screen that stands between the pleasure and the desire, stops the pleasure, not letting it expand directly in the desire, as prior to the tzimtzum. When the Or Yashar, the direct light, comes, the masach rejects it and checks how much it can receive in order to bestow. And this will be called Or Chozer. It clothes the Or Yashar in Or Chozer. Say 20% of Or Yashar clothed in Or Chozer. They expand within as Or Pnimi, from Peh to Tabur. And 80% of the light of the Or Yashar, that direct light that was rejected, remain on the outside. Now they're called Or Makif, surrounding lights. The Or Pnimi, the inner light, expands slowly or gradually within the 10 sfirot, or 5 parts of the guf. In the part that receives the guf, the light, we divide it into Ket, Chokhmah, Binah, Zaranpin, and Malchut. The soft part is also divided into Ket, Chokhmah, Binah, Zaranpin, and Malchut. And of course the Rosh is also divided into 5 parts because it has to calculate. Ket, Chokhmah, Binah, Zaranpin, Malchut. So we have 30 sfirot of the Parzuf. The lights that expand in the Parzuf as Or Pnimi, inner light, we call them, as we said in the previous lesson, we call them lights of Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechidah. Once the Parzuf filled itself to a certain limit, which is called Tabur, navel, where it knows that it cannot receive more than that, and stands in that place, now the Or Makif, the surrounding light that remained on the outside, comes and presses that borderline called Tabur. Meaning what? The host, the creator, wants the creature to receive the pleasure endlessly, without any limitation. That was the thought of creation, to do with these creations, to directly fill up Prinat Dalet with pleasures. And however the creature responds, it comes as indirect influence of the creator, where the creator gives the creature the sensation of what it means to be the host, the giver behind the scenes. And out of that, because of that, the creature begins to react differently, not as a receiver directly, but as wanting to be like the creator. But directly speaking, the light wants to fill up the creature. So the Or Makif that was rejected from the Parzuf crushes the Parzuf and wants to enter it. In that pressure, or the Parzuf is not willing to waver before that pressure, because the Parzuf decided to receive in order to bestow over that part of 20% in the Parzuf. So it received the opening with the inner light. It's willing to handle it, cope with it, to handle, to receive the Or Yashar in the Rosh in order to bestow the direct light. But the surplus, the pleasure that comes to it, that's too much to bear. Why? Again, we can see it from the previous example of the host and the guest. If the guest stands opposite the host and says, I don't want anything. I'm not hungry, I don't want, but the host really tries to persuade me, take it, why don't you? It's good for you, I worked so hard for you, do me a favor. Receive from me, take something from me. So the guest really wants to receive everything that the host wants to give. Let's say the host has five different courses. Just like we have 5 lights, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, corresponding to our 5 kelim. We have Ket, Chokhmah, Binah, Zran, Pen, and Malchut in our desire. And correspondingly we have Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, in lights. So the guest feels that it is willing to receive all these lights from the host. It's willing to receive them, to have all of them, and the kli will be filled up. That's the kli and that's the fulfillment. So that's what it wants. But because of the shame, because he feels the essence of the creature, of the creator, of being a giver, he restricts himself, the creature, because he feels that there is a giver and the creature is a receiver. So he can't tolerate it, that gap between the giver and the receiver. And that's why it makes it tzimtzum. Puts up a screen up there, and says, I do not receive anything. The host pleads, pressures, and out of this pressure appears a need in the host. What need? The host suffers because the guest does not enjoy. So then the guest feels greater or dominating the host, determining the state of the host. So in that state, it begins to understand that if he receives, but that's after he feels that the host suffers. This suffering becomes in the guest as pain. So if he feels, well, what we will later on call the pain of divinity, the affliction of divinity. So it'll be able to receive it, and that reception will be in order to give pleasure, to do a favor to the host. That calculation is made by the kli and receives, as we've said, we've agreed to write 20% of our pleasure, and 80% are still rejected. So in 20% it gave pleasure to the host, made itself similar to the host. These 20% are given back to the Creator as pleasure, but 80% are not. But these 20% are reception of pleasures, and therefore, when it receives the pleasures and fills itself up to a certain extent in some of the desires, what does it mean in some of the desires? Where all these desires are filled up to some extent, 20%. By that, these desires grow weaker, because they already know what the pleasure is in itself, and what it means to give to the host. The huge pleasures that appear in the will to receive. So when this Or Makif, surrounding light, the 80% continues to pressure after the reception of the pleasure, although these are only 80%, not 100 as it was here in the Rosh, Or Yashar's direct light, but it's now very hard to tolerate it, because what does it talk about? It says, you cannot perform the thought of creation. The host is suffering. You feel how pleasurable it is to receive in the kli. You have to continue receiving. So, in that state, when the Kli stands at taboo after the partial reception, now it's in a dilemma. Can I continue to receive or not? So the Kli feels that it can't. If it receives more under this O Makif, of this O Makif, it'll be a reception in order to bestow, to receive. And it doesn't agree to that. Tzimtzum Aleph cannot be breached whatever happens. What it can do is only one thing. It can leave this entire state, eject all the lights, just like in Tzimtzum Aleph when it had Naran Chai from Petu Tabu, and remain empty. Go back to the previous state where it had a Rosh, and the Guf was completely empty, as it was before it decided how much to receive in order to receive, and actually received it. So it goes back to the previous state as it was prior to the actual reception. So that's what it does. As the lights entered one by one into the Kli of the Toch, so they one by one leave. The reception of the lights from Peh to Tabu is called Ta'amim. The lights that enter the Guf and the lights that leave the Guf are called Nekudot. Because they disclose darkness, a black point. Point is Nekudah. As they leave the body, the light leaves an imprint, an impression of having been in the body and now not being there. So it's an additional lack that the body feels within it. Its general desire continues to be felt. It never disappears. And now there are additional desires here, additional deficits here of once having pleasures, being able to be a giver and now being unable. So in addition to the O Yashar, to the direct light, and the O Chozer, the returning light, and the O Pnimi and the O Makif, the inner and surrounding lights, we also have light called Ta'amim, flavors, and the light called Nekudot, points. The light that expands in the Guf in reception is called Ta'amim, and the light that exits the Guf because of the limitation is called Nekudot. And this act that we perform in the Peh of the Rosh is called Zivug, coupling. Actually, Zivug de Haka'ah. Haka'ah is beating. Why? Because when the light comes, the Rosh, the Masach, strikes the light and pushes it back. It doesn't want to receive it. So that's the Haka'ah, that's the beating. And afterwards it calculates how much it can receive within. And that's the Zivug. So although there is a beating here, a Haka'ah of the Masach on the light, still afterwards, there's a Zivug, the connection between them, the coupling, where O Yashar close in the O Chozer, and they are received within the Patzuf. That's why it's called Zivug de Haka'ah, Zivug of Haka'ah, Zivug, the unification, the connection that comes through the Haka'ah, the beating. So, the encounter of the O Makif with the Masach that stands at the Tabu of the Patzuf is called Bitush, again beating. Bitush of O Makif, the surrounding light, on the O Pnim and O Pnimi, inner light. Meaning both lights pressure the Tabu and want to expand further to the Sof of the Patzuf. How does the fulfillment work, the light within the Patzuf? The light that comes in the Patzuf and is rejected by the Masach, and then through the calculation is received within, expands, as we've said, gradually. There's a masach in Pederosh that constantly rejects the lights, so it doesn't receive in order to bestow it to receive it. It maintains its Tzimtzum Aleph, and there's a masach that receives in order to bestow. The masach that decides to receive in order to bestow descends from Pei down, in B'chinat Shoresh or Sfirat Keter, and then B'chinat Aleph or Sfirat Chokhmah, to B'chinat Bet or Sfirat Binah, to B'chinat Gimel or Sfirat Zaranpin, and to B'chinat Daled, Malchut, Sfirat Malchut. Now it reaches the Tabur. In all these Sfirot we have Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. These are the lights. So the sum total of all these lights is called Or Pnimi, the inner light. An impression, the impression of receiving. So that form, the Or Makif that comes and pressures the Tabur, meaning the receiving masach that descended, and as it descended, it gradually let in the light into the toch of the Parzuf. So now that masach, through the bitush of Pnimi Makif, now it purifies. So in the same manner, it ejects the light. The masach goes back up to Pederosh and ejects the whole light. And then these two masachim, screens, join. The masach that does not let the light enter the goof in order to receive, and the masach that calculates and lets the light that can be received in order to bestow into the goof. So these two masachim, these two screens, now return to the Pederosh. So we've said that the lights that come from above downward are called Or Pnimi or Ta'amim, and the lights that exit the Parzuf are called Nekudot. So the Parzuf is purified. Actually, the Masach. Meaning, before, when the Kli was in the state of Dalet of Itlapshut and Dalet of Yud, and the Masach wanted to work with the entire Kli of Dalet of Yud, the intention was over the entire Dalet of Yud, the complete B'china Dalet, as much as possible to work in order to bestow. Now, when this Masach returns to Pederosh, it thinks this: I feel that I can't work with the entire B'china Dalet, so I'll work with a lesser B'china. So instead of B'china Dalet of the Ovyut, of the Masach, now appears in it B'china Dalet of the Hitlapshut and B'china Gimel of the Ovyut, meaning the light that was in the previous Parzuf is remembered. The Reshimo, the recollection of the light, remains as it was, but now the Reshimo from the Kli is lessened. It feels that it can't be in that state, but on a lesser state than before. A lesser state than before, we call it Gimel de Avyut Gimel. So if Malchut Ein Sof, that stands behind B'chinot Shoresh Aleph Bet Gimel, and wanted to work with all her Avyut, with everything that comes to her. Now she works not with all her Avyut that comes to her after the previous B'chinot, but with half, or a quarter of it, etc. Malchut de Ein Sof, because she receives her aviyut, her desire from the previous Prinot, from Gimel, Bet, Aleph, Shalosh. That's why when she is purified from her maximum Prinat Dalet, she takes upon herself work with Prinat Gimel, meaning her impression of the work with the previous Prinat, with the light that came to her, is now as Gimel compared to Dalet. So that's what happens here in the first Patzuf. That finished everything, received as much as it could in order to bestow, and stopped its action and returned to the previous state. So that Patzuf, if we draw it in its fullest form, as the Rosh Toch Sof, having received the Ta'amim through Zivug Daka, and then these Ta'amim leave, and it returns to the previous state, having Rosh and Toch and Sof not in actual fact anymore. So these actions of the entrance of the lights into the Patzuf, the exit of the lights from the Patzuf, the work with the Reshimot of Dalet, and how the situation comes to Reshimot Dalet Gimel, which is what is left. This whole process here, 5 Patzufim of entrance of lights, 5 Patzufim in the exit of lights of the light, all this process in there, all of them are called one Patzuf, Galgalta. Galgalta comes from the word Gulgolet, skull, or Keter, crown, Shosh, the roots, the beginning, the highest. It's the first act in order to bestow that Malchut performs after Tzimtzum Aleph in her decision to resemble the Creator, to be like the Creator. After that, that Patzuf, Galgalta, which ended its act, where Reshimot Dalet Gimel appear in it, decides that now it can work on Reshimot Dalet Gimel and realize them. So that's what it does. So this is how 5 Patzufim come out. Because we can, because Malchut Ein Sof can work with all the Prinot. With half of it is Gimel, with less of it is Bet, and less is Aleph, and less is Shos. So we have 5 Reshimot in Malchut Ein Sof that it works with. So we can draw it this way. As Malchut Ein Sof, that in Patzuf Galgalta received in order to bestow up to her taboo. That's the sof of the Patzuf, below taboo, to Siyum. Where the decision is made is called Peh. The Toch is the place where the Opnimi is received. Then there's a purification. It's called Hizdakchut, through the Bitush of Pnimi Umakif. There's a return to that state of Pedorosh of Galgalta, where Galgalta worked with Reshimot Dalet Dalet. And according to the Reshimot Dalet Gimel, we should now draw another state of the next Patzuf. It's a reception of the light of Malchut Ein Sof, not with its 4 Prinot, but with 3 Prinot. And that'll be on the level of the Chazeh of the previous Patzuf. Chazeh is its chest. It's one level lower than the Peh. So here there's Bitush Pnimi Makif. Again, from the Or Yashar that comes, but now the Or Yashar comes through Patzuf Galgalta. On it, it creates a Masach that stands at the new Peh, Now, the Masach makes a Zivug Daka and receives the light in order to bestow, and this is done on Rishimot Dalet Gimel. Afterwards, there's Bitush Pnimi Makif here too. And as a result, the Hizdakut, the purification up to the Peh, the ejection of the lights, and the decision to work with lesser Rishimot than before, which are Rishimot that are called Gimel Bet. Why do we have from Dalet Ditlapshut to Dalet Ditlapshut in the next Patsuf? It's the same Rishimot, but from the second to the third Patsuf, it's no longer the same Rishimot. It's because the light that expands from Ein Sof, in Galgalta it's the same light. It's all the same light. So that light comes to the next Patsuf, and it's Rishimot, which is called Ab. Ein Bet. Ab. We'll explain these names later. These names are the Gimatria of the Patsuf, the numeric value, the Hebrew letters of the Patsuf. So when the next Patsuf uses, Patsuf Ab, uses the Gimel Deoviut, the light that it draws within is now a different light, following a new desire, because light always follows a desire. So in Patsuf Ab, the Patsuf that expands is not the same as in Galgalta, but it's the O of Ab, which is O of Gimel. So the next Patsuf has an even lesser light than Galgalta, and in the third Patsuf an even lesser light. It works in the light that was in Ab, and so the light that comes to it comes through Patsuf Galgalta and through Patsuf Ab. So of course, it is a lesser light. It is now Gimel de Hitlapshut, Gimel of Hitlapshut. Bet de Oviut, Bet of Oviut is what's left of it from Ab, where Malchut works only with Shorosh, Aleph, and Bet. Pchinot Shorosh, Aleph, and Bet. So this Patsuf expands in its Toch too, from its Peh, which stands vis-a-vis the Chazeh of Patsuf Ab. This Patsuf is called Sag. That's its Gematria. We will learn later on where this name comes from. So in it too there is Bitush Pnimi Makif. And it too purifies out of this, because of this Bitush, and decides to decrease, to descend in the degree of reception of light, and receives in order to bestow in the Rishimot that remain after the Sag, which are Bet Aleph, 2 by 1, and expands with these Rishimot, this decision, and this Patsuf is called Ma. That's its Gematria, and in it too there is Bitush Pnimi Makif. It purifies, performs Hizdakut. I forgot to say that it's at the level of Chazed Sag, and as it purifies, it descends to the level of Chazeh of Patsuf Ma, and procreates the last Patsuf, which is called Bon in Gematria, or Aleph Shorosh. So now it works with Aviut Shorosh, which is the last of these. And in that, Malchut Ein Sof concludes her work with all the previous degrees prior to it, and in these five Patsufim, Galgalta Ab Sag Ma Bon, these 5 portions of receiving of light in order to bestow, or being like the Creator, bringing contentment, equalizing with the Creator, in that she completely realizes herself. So these 5 portions, when they complete every possible act of Malchut Ein Sof, they are called Olam, world of Adam Kadmon. Why Adam Kadmon? Adam Kadmon means actually the primordial man, because it's like a system where afterwards the system of Adam, which is also a spiritual system but on a different world, in the world of Atzilut, it will be built according to the same pattern, the same form as this world. So now we see that only a part of Malchut Ein Sof was actually fulfilled. Only this part, from Pete Galgalta to its taboo. It received 100% of fulfillment. In Galgalta, say 20%, and then Absag Mein Bon, but all in all, this part was fulfilled by 100%. But the Sof part, meaning Malchut herself, remained completely empty. Other than O Chasadim, the light of mercy that was here, which gave some contentment, because Malchut does not use her own desire but wants to be like the Creator. Other than that tiny satisfaction of somehow, I'm at least not opposite from the Creator. Other than that, there's nothing here. And indeed, in that part, which is Malchut herself, that's the primary reception of the light and the primary ability to give pleasure to the Creator and the primary ability to equalize in form with the Creator. And the height of the equivalence of form, of dvikut, adhesion, is attained only by this part, being able to receive in order to bestow, being able to perform an act of bestowal. And we see that as yet there is no masach for receiving in order to bestow on that part. There's only a masach to reject the light, not letting the light breach into this B'china Dalet. Either this masach stands at Pederosh or it comes down to the tabu, but it always makes sure the light doesn't enter B'china Dalet, the sof of the Partzuf. And we see that only Galgalta could fill up this B'china Dalet with O Chasadim, but the next Partzuf, meaning the weaker portions of bestowal, didn't even touch this B'china Dalet, touching it or fulfilling it or working with it. You might put it differently. In Galgalta, in the first portion, this part of Malchut worked with all the previous B'chinot and with itself. And after the first portion, after Galgalta, it works only with the prior B'chinot, but not with itself. So, the Sof of Galgalta, which designates the entire Malchut Ein Sof, which remains empty, it remains without an act of bestowal. So how do we come from a state of emptiness to a state of fulfillment, which will be called Gmar Tikkun, end of correction of the entire Malchut Ein Sof, in resembling it to the Creator? This we will have to talk about in the coming lessons.